beaches are ones that we monitor. And just to plot out this data, so this is the detections of microcystin in our lakes from 2017, and this is thanks to Grace Wilkinson. She's not here. If we had the expert giving the talk, it would be her, but she's doing another talk right now, so that's why you have me. But you can see the plot of what's happened with our detectable microcystin over the past year. So we have a lot of it. All right, where are we going? Suspended sediment loads have been reduced since the Dust Bowl. Phosphorus moves with sediment. Nitrogen is increasing, had increased, but is relatively flat. And a lot of our nutrient reduction strategies are thinking about nitrogen. So just Schilling produced this plot. That's suspended sediment in the Raccoon River. You can see from 1900 to current, we're doing a better job of keeping soil where it belongs on the landscape. As a result, this shows kind of the same trend for phosphorus from about 2000 until current. So sediment's reducing, phosphorus is reducing. Nitrogen is not reducing, it's increasing. That's the big thing about the nutrient reduction strategy. We want to deal with nitrogen or to reduce that. Now, like I said, the nutrient reduction strategy wants to reduce nitrogen, but the majority of our P is being retained in fields, but some of that is still getting out there from stream bank erosion. So as we progress into the future, we're wanting to reduce the N loss from the landscape. We're not really doing much to deal with the P loss from the landscape, and especially the stream bank erosion. And we don't have any practices approved for stream bank erosion. So where is that going to take us? Well, once again, here's our Redfield ratio. If we do accomplish a 45% reduction in nitrogen loss, but we don't deal with our phosphorus losses to any great degree, our 7% of samples being below this N to P ratio, where we have a much greater likelihood for our cyanobacteria blooms, will become 35%. And that's just using last year's data. This could go higher, could go lower. Take home is, if we keep working really hard on nitrogen and don't deal with some of the phosphorus problems, cyanobacteria is likely to become a much bigger problem than it is today, and it's already a decent sized problem. So with that, we are going to transition to our next speaker. Let's see. Read this. So our next speaker is Susie Dye. She is, hand this to you. We'll do this awkwardly. That's the best one I've ever seen. You put that on, and I will read really loud. Susie began her role as the as director of the Environmental Health Division at the State Hygienic Laboratory in December 2016. She leads programs to monitor and analyze environmental contaminants in drinking water, groundwater, soil, food, and other sources. She previously served as a research associate professor for the Office of the Texas State Chemist with a joint appointment at Texas A&M Department of Veterinary Pathology in the vet school. Her background focused in the field application of measurement science, regulatory science, biomonitoring, biotechnology, quality control, and quality assurance, and risk assessment. Means she's a lot smarter than me. Dye has developed and implemented risk management models while maintaining research programs and academic appointments. She earned her bachelor's in chemistry from Fudan University in Shanghai, China, and then entered the Duke University doctoral program, where she earned a PhD in chemistry with additional educational courses in biomedical engineering and regulatory science. And she is going to tell us about some new methodologies that they have developed at the State Hygienic Laboratory to detect microcystin much more effectively and cost effectively for us, as we potentially need to do more of this monitoring in the future.
Great. Thank you for the introduction. I think the bio I sent you is much shorter than the work. So I'm very glad to be here First, I will talk to you. As Jeff gave a wonderful presentation, why do we care about sediment here? Why do we care about how for algal blooms? I will talk to you why do we care about microsystems. And the second part of my presentation will cover the technology and the new methods we develop in the State Hygienic Lab, how we can help the community to effectively monitor microsystems in the waterways. And the last part will be very short. I still want to talk to you about some emerging technologies that people like to use in the future for control of microsystems. So why do we care about microsystems? And this is an image that shows the general structure of the microsystems. Up to date, there are more than 90 variants discovered to this group of chemicals. And then those are the chemicals produced by microsystems. It's really the algal bloom products. And then, as I mentioned, there are more than 90 variants discovered, and so far the microsystem LR is the most toxic variant. So those microsystems, look at the structure of the peptides. Those are very potent hydrotoxin and neurotoxin as well. Study has shown that they have very toxicity on the GI system and the heart, as well as if the microsystems are inhaled, then it can cause damage to the lung. Chronic exposure based on the animal study shows those can be potential mutagens which lead into liver cancer, as well as cardiotoxicity. One of the most notorious human exposure accidents happened was in 1996. And even at that time, people have good knowledge about harmful algal bloom. But unfortunately, in this medical facility in Brazil, 50 patients died from the exposure to the microsystem containing water in their hemodialysis facility. And on the outside, 81% of the patients shows the symptom consistent with algal toxicity. So what happened in this case is the facility is not a malfunction, it's not a malpractice. They follow every practice they need to do to their patients, but they were not able to find out the source water they used for dialysis had been contaminated with microsystems. So this also highlights the importance when we're doing with environmental monitoring and policy making, that what's the real public health concern, what's the mechanism of the exposure, and what can the consequence for that. So that's like, we hope, the only one accident ever happened for human exposure to microsystems in a medical treatment facility. But in our routine life, the routes of exposure to microsystems can, including drinking water, and including swimming in the waterway that has been heavily contaminated with microsystems. And boating at water sports, we can see one wonderful picture with the kids. And you can also be exposed to microsystems by eating food that has been contaminated with microsystems, as well as dietary supplements, if there's no monitoring activity ongoing to make sure you don't have those unexpected contamination events. So this part goes to U.S. Army. So why does the Corps care about microsystems? The Corps owns 420 lakes in 43 states. Those lakes host more than 30% of all freshwater fishing, and they own more than 4,000 recreational areas in our country. And all of those areas, 80% are within 50 miles of a large U.S. city. So if you haven't been to a lake in the last summer, you probably have a boring ride. But I did. I took my kids to the lakes, and well, before I look at these slides, I never recognized how important for those monitoring activity can happen. Because I will not drink from the water in the lake, but my kids might. And then I'm not going to read the statistics of the numbers to you. This basically summarizes the land owned by the federal government, and our community spend a lot of time on those places. So that's why U.S. Army Corps Engineer do care about the lakes they own in our state. Unfortunately, as a headquarters, U.S. Army doesn't have a agency-wide policy for how they can handle those algal blooms. So what they come up with, in this slide, it talks to you about what has been common in our lakes owned by the federal government. So most of our contamination for algal of the room are cyanobacteria, which is what Jack mentioned. Because the federal land is not exception than our state land. And then a few of the coastal districts in the Army also use red pipes, which is not a problem in our here. As I mentioned, the U.S. Army Corps, they don't have a corps-wide policy for HAB response. So typically what they do, they follow the state guidance. And historically, for those cyanobacteria outbreak in the Iowa lakes owned by the federal government, they have 3 sites with monitoring activity. They will issue a note when they see abnormal outbreak of microsystem contamination. So you can see there were 9 notes issued for Silver Lake from 1996. There are 12 issued for Red Rock, and then only 3 for Kroger. I have more data to support this line in the later part of my presentation. So now the second part, I want to talk to you from a technical perspective. I'm a person working in the lab, so I'm very interested to know what you do to monitor those cyanobacteria in the waterways. So when you're doing a test, the purpose for doing a test are not more than those 3 purposes. Once you want to do a screening, you want to know what happens. Then you want to have a qualitative assessment of, the presence or absence of this chemical. Then you want a quantitative measurement, how much of that chemical in that sample. And historically, I want to talk to you about 2 major categories we use to measure macrosystems. The first one I will talk is a biochemistry-based method, and it's an indirect measurement of this chemical in the sample. So it's based on the binding of your target, of your chemical with a protein in this case. And then the action is dependent on a label that will give you a signal when the target is binding with your protein as association or dissociation event. And many of these existing platforms are based on either enzyme or substrate interaction reaction, or either based on antibody and antigen interaction. So starting from 1990, this is one of the first biochemistry assay developed by research labs, and many of those has been commercialized. So on the picture here on the left, this interaction is based on the enzyme interacting with its substrate as well as macrosystems. So in this particular reaction, macrosystem is an inhibitor for this protein, the phosphatase. So when you have your phosphatase working properly on the substrate, in this case is PNTP, then the phosphatase will convert this substrate into natural phenol. And then on the alkaline conditions, it's going to give you a yellowish color. So think how you have macrosystem, which is inhibited for this protein. And if you throw your microsystem into the solution, then you have less yellowish color. And another way to do this reaction and have a label is people can incorporate a radioactive phosphate into the protein. And then again, because macrosystem inhibits this reaction, then if you add more macrosystem into the reaction, then you have less release of the radioactivity. So by measuring those change of the color, then you can quantify the macrosystem by doing this biochemistry reaction. And then another one is very commonly referred to, called ELISA. I know many of you heard of this term, but the mechanism behind that is based on an antigen and antibody reaction. So different from the previous slide I showed you, it's a substrate reacting with an enzyme. In this particular case, people determine of the reaction based on the recognition of macrosystems, based on the special developed antibody. So there are many different formats of ELISA testing. I'm using this as an illustration of one possible way you can use ELISA to test macrosystems. So in this particular case, you immobilize antigen, in this case, the macrosystem on the surface, on the solid phase. Then you have your free macrosystem in solution, then you have antibody to compete, binding with your free macrosystems as well as the chemical you immobilize on the plate. When you wash them away, you add another antibody, then you still have a probe which gives you a signal. So by measuring the signal change, dependent on the concentration of the microsystems, you can quantify the chemical in your solution. And then, as I mentioned to you, I know many of you really care about, those are wonderful techniques. What are those things that are really good to me? Then starting from the development of the ELISA kits, then there are a lot of companies producing those products. available to customers like you in this room. And these are the examples I took from the EPA website. I didn't go a little bit of real telling there's a testing done in a research lab. So I use that as kind of official evaluation. And in 2010, people from actually Canadian government agency, they evaluated 4 kits from 3 vendors, compared the ELISA kit and the phosphate inhibition assay kit. Then in 2012, Nova Scotia, they evaluated 2 testing kits based on the ELISA technology. Then in 2012, EPA itself evaluated 6 kits from 3 vendors. I guess some of you in this room are probably familiar with those kits. Those are the ones that you have using in your daily testing for microsystems. So I'm not endorsing any product here. So this is a table from the EPA report. I want to highlight a few discoveries from that study. Is if you look at this comparison of the accuracy, precision, and detection limits, those are the 3 most important features when you're using the testing technology to measure chemical. If you look at the first row in this slide, for that ELISA-based testing, the accuracy percentage is for between -45% to 58%. If you look at the first row of this table, I don't know how clear it is to you sitting in the back. So the accuracy for that particular microsystem tube test is -76% to 21%. Again, I'm not endorsing any product. I'm only going to present you the facts of what they discovered in those evaluation studies. So how do you quantify those toxins in those chemical, biochemistry-based assay? As I mentioned, your concentration is dependent on signal change. When you have your probe on the protein, then you can see that either the yellowish color is faded, or you have some more colorful rings, depending on how you design your chemical assay. So now I'm going to talk about the second category of testing technology we use to measure microsystems. Those are I call direct measurement. So different from the biochemistry assay, you're dependent on the signal change when the protein is interacting with your microsystems. In those instrumentation methods, you have a direct measurement. You just get the chemical out of your sample. You throw out your instrumentation, you analyze that directly. So this is a chromatography presentation of how people separate out those different variables for microsystems in one sample. And typically with this instrumentation analysis, the difference is for the detector. So you can use a spectroscopy detector or the mass spectrometry detector. What's the biggest difference behind those different detectors? With regard to mass spectrometry, I call that a fingerprinting technology. And for fingerprinting technology, it's very sensitive and it's very specific. And you think of the spectroscopy, it's starting from study of the light interaction with the molecule. So I call that molecular image. You basically study biochemical interaction with the light. Then with mass spectrometry, what you do is measure the weight of the molecule. And then another big difference is also the price. I will get to that point later. So if you think of mass spectrometry, which is measuring the weight of your molecule, I like to talk to people who have heard about mass spectrometry, think of a balance. How you measure the weight of a lead. It's the same. In this particular case, if you look at the spectrum on the left, so those peaks showing a detection of a macrosystem molecule. Then for modern days, most of those mass spectrometry can do fragmentation reaction in the instrumentation. So the picture on the right, to that particular peak, is the instrumentation has break down that molecule into small pieces. That's why I put a fingerprint. It's like you see the legs and the arms on this particular molecule. That's why I give this instrumentation the power of being very specific. So it can tell you what it is by ID the molecule in the mix of the chemicals. And how do we quantify those toxins? In the instrumentation assay is we prepare a standard solution by series. You know the concentration of your chemical. Then for the sample, you don't know the concentration, you throw out instrumentation and measure the same instrumentation response, so you know how much you have for your chemical. So that's why I call it a direct measurement. And again, this, I'm not endorsing any technology here. I get this quote from the Keller report where they did the evaluation in 2012. So the comment in that review is the immunoassay in this case, as you have seen in So they're referring to using immunoassay technology at faster and less costly than traditional methods. In this case, they're referring to instrumentation or direct measurement of your chemical. So at that time, when they did a study, the claim was the cost for analyzing a sample for one analyte using ELISA-based, immunoassay-based technique could be about $20. And then at that time, doing a GC mass spec measurement can cost you between $500 to $900. So 15 years have passed, things might change a little bit, because ELISA is still very cost effective. Thinking of you're doing a big batch of your analysis. So I highlight the sentence here for depending on the number of replicates run. People already think ELISA is cheap, only when you have a lot of samples to analyze at one time. But it can be very expensive if you have only one sample. And then for GC mass spec or other instrumentation analysis, you can lower your cost, also depending on the batch of the sample you can run. And as I explained to you, people think those tests are very expensive. There are many factors contributing to the cost of those tests, such as instrumentation. Mass spectrometers are typically one of the most expensive instruments you can have in your lab. And then you have to have very highly skilled personnel to run those tests, as well as for some of the EPA-endorsed methods. You have to have this isotope labeled internal standards. That's the EPA method. You cannot run away from it. And you have to use this very specialized, special treated chemical that are very expensive. So all those factors are contributing to your test cost by using instrumentation analysis. And as a chemist, I'm always talking to people, testing is fitness for purpose. Mass spectrometers or spectroscopy, there's no difference than a car you're driving. You can drive a BMW, you can drive a Mazda, and you can drive this Google self-driving car, depending on the purpose, right? And then that's why I'm referring to people, even you look at the mass spectrometers, there are like different models of the car you can pick. The gold standards in the mass spectrometry world is this called triple particle mass spectrometers. And on the top panel here, it shows you the image of how it represents in the instrumentation. People call that tandem in mass. As I mentioned to you, when you're taking a fragmentation of a molecule, then you can move the molecule and tandem that in space. In this particular case, when you have your microsystem in the Q1 in that cell, you move that into Q2, you break down the molecule, then you measure the daughter ion in the Q3. By doing this, you have very good sensitivity and specificity. But in many other parts in the world, you can drive a Mazda, you can drive a Ford. Besides, you have to drive a BMW. Then this is another type of instrumentation. People call that it's a faster scanning instrumentation. It's wonderful to scan a lot of molecules at the same time. But it might not be as quantitative, as sensitive, as specific as the first mass spectrometers on top. And our lab is fortunate to have these different types of mass spectrometers. So when I have those service requests from different customers, from different institutions, and they often come to me and I have this one sample, I have these 3 samples. So the price I can offer with the ELISA test is as high as a spectrometer-based instrumentation. So we decided we are going to use this mass spectrometry, even though it's not a low standard for quantitation, by the traditional definition. We call that LTQ, it's a linear ion trap. So the fragmentation pattern for this mass spectrometry is different than the previous one I talked to you about tandem in space. And this one, you have all the molecules in the same place. You fragment at different time, but you measure them in the same space. So again, I want to warn you, this instrumentation is not as sensitive as the previous instrumentation I talked about. But the good thing is when we validate our method, we find it's as specific and as sensitive as other EPA-endorsed mass spectrometer-based methods. So what we did, this study actually has multiple purposes. So I want to invite you to look at this 2x2 table. What we did is we compared the ELISA and with our mass spec instrumentation methods by doing both negative and positive comparison. If you look at the top row here, out of 72 samples detected as positive from the ELISA, we have close to 50%, which is actually negative in the LC-mass spectrum. Then this ELISA assay actually is wonderful for false negative rate you are more tolerant on forced particle rate. So the first purpose for this comparison is we want to know how good our LC-MS method is or how bad that ELISA test is. Then the second purpose for doing this project actually was evaluating a lot of surface water samples we collected. Actually, that's a project working with IDNR. Back in 2015, that's a surface water monitoring project. We are evaluating those microsystems in the surface water, which are the water source for the drinking water for the public water supplies. And then at that time, the method we used is ELISA-based. It's an EPA-approved method, and that's the only choice we can have, particularly regarding to the drinking water operation. Then very interesting what we found out. That's the other purpose I'm talking to you about why we're using this LC-MS spec-based assay to analyze the surface water samples. It's because we have particular interest to know what are those components, the profiling of those variants in your microsystem samples. The ELISA test is a total microsystem reporting. So as I mentioned to you, this instrumentation analysis by mass spec, it's a direct measurement which can ID different variants for those microsystems in the total sample. So we apply this method to all those surface samples we collected, and those surface samples are eventually the drinking water source for our people in our state. Then you can see the comparison in this particular slide. The blue line shows you the ELISA testing results, and then the column shows you the total concentration by adding those variants together by the LC-MS spec methods. So very interesting, as I mentioned to you, MC microsystem LR is the most toxic variant in those more than 90 variants. And then in this particular location, southwest Iowa, we figured out over all the season when we did our sampling, microsystem LR is a major component. Then the second slide here actually is a place in south central Iowa. Then we didn't find it. We found expression or production of the microsystem LR only in August. Then after that, there was no LR released. And also very interesting in some other locations, we have the comparison of the ELISA testing and our LC-MS spec testing. So if you look at the first figure here on the left, the ELISA is pretty consistent with the LC-MS spec analysis. But you can see that very interesting profiling of the components, of the toxic components in the microsystem concentration. So the last one is even more interesting to me. If you look at the profiling of the production of the microsystems, you can see a heavy production of microsystem LR in the early season of the sampling, but then it has a flip over. The microsystem LR is totally gone. They have different production of the variants in your sampling. So as a public health lab, we're not only interested to know how much is the total microsystem in there. So the purpose for this study is only the beginning of a research project. We hope to know what can be the contributing factor for the production of the most toxic component in the total microsystems. And at the same time, when we validated the method, what we thought is okay, we know there's a huge community need for those monitoring activities. So based on the platform we have been using, we were able to come up with a very cost-effective way. So we're currently offering this test at the same price as the ELISA testing for our community. And then back to the recreational water. I know that's what Daniel is going to talk to you about a beach monitoring project in our state. So this slide belongs to Thomas Keller from U.S. Army Corps of Engineer. And I talked to you, the headquarters of the Army doesn't have one policy covering the operation in different districts. So each district come up with following the state guidance. So particularly in Iowa, actually it's interesting because Iowa doesn't do the same as Illinois, which is part of waterfall, which is bad for federal government. But again, in Iowa, we only use 20 micrograms per liter as our kind of cautionary level. That varies a long time, so separate correctly. Then that's what the U.S. Army did is follow the Iowa guidance in our state. So then this map is actually more complicated than what I can comprehend because I got started from Thomas. I told him I can present, but I can answer the question for you. And then they have their own protocol in this particular district, so how they respond to Algal Bloom. So those are the data. I know it's very hard to view from the back, and I mentioned to you there are 3 locations that have a very well-designed monitoring plan, including Colorado, Red Rock, and Silver Lake. By just a very simple higher contamination of microsystems reported. And then all of those 3 locations actually, Sediment is heavily contaminated with microsystems over many years from the monitoring data. So this is only a snapshot from 2012 to 2017. And the previous slide I showed you, they started this activity in the 90s. So now I will only have a few slides to go as emerging technologies. The purpose for this presentation, I don't want to educate you for every technology people are using to measure microsystems. So I try to compare with most popular platforms in my second part of the presentation. So I have another 3 slides to talk to you about the emerging technologies, what could be used in the future, and what's the attractiveness of those technologies. So compared to the biochemistry assay, this aptamer-based assay are using biomolecules rather than proteins. So I'm using this figure here to highlight people are using RNA to immobilize those biomolecules onto the surface by using the 3-dimensional structure to capture microsystems. Then again, they have to incorporate a probe by measuring the change of the color or the radioactivity, whatever probe they are incorporating, they can quantify the microsystems. And the most attractive to people here, particularly with many watershed people, when you care about what decision you can make, is this portable format. And then the nice thing why I think this particular sample is included in that kit, they offer a lysis device in the middle here, showing as a very dark color tube. So by doing this very simple in-field sample processing, then you can get more accurate readouts by using a portable reader when you have those still biochemistry-based assay. So that's why I put this slide here, showing you people are really hoping to move this analysis into the field. And as I mentioned to you, mass spectrometers like cars, you can be self-driving Google car, and you can still drive your board. So this is another mass spectrometer we have in our lab, and also people have used this for research purposes. And this particular instrumentation is different from the one I talked to you for qualification purposes. And this mass spectrometer is a very simple processing instrumentation. You can get your solution onto a plate, you dry it, you can shoot a laser, then you can get an analysis. So on the picture here on the right is kind of a picture of a mix of microsystems, and you can see a beautiful spectrum for each individual variant in that mix. So the hope of applying this mass spectrometry analysis to those environmental samples, in my hope when we're doing this research project, is we can just get an environmental sample during the process, put on a mass spec to see all those variants, then you know the toxicity, you know the profiling of different variants in the environmental sample. So that's an ongoing research in the lab right now. So with that,
I think we'll hold off on cancer questions at the end after Dan does his presentation. Our last presenter is Dan Kendall. Dan joined the DNR in 2016, coming from the Iowa State Limnology Lab to work for DNR. I can tell stories. His daughter and my daughter are great little second grade friends until he moved to Des Moines. He's the Ambient Lake and Beach Monitoring Coordinator, and Dan holds a Bachelor of Science degree from UC Santa Barbara. Why are you here?
That's been the question. My wife went to vet school on campus here, and that's how I got stuck here for 15 years almost now, so we're never going back. Anyway, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our kind of beach program and hab monitoring that we do. It's one of our new signs for 2017 season. We're always on watch, and then we'll have a warning. This is just a little description of the talk. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the program, talk a little bit about hab blooms, human health issues. Susie covered some of that stuff, which will make me a little bit shorter. Some recent events we've had that were big in the news, and then what we've learned with the data that we have for the beach monitoring program. So like Jeff mentioned earlier, we've got 39 state beaches across the state that we're monitoring for our state beaches, and then we've got another 29 roughly of county beaches that we monitor. For the most part though, all of our microsystem sampling is done at all of our state beaches, at our state beaches and not our county beaches. All our analysis is done by the end of Thursday of each week, between Memorial Day and Labor Day, and then we report the data out to the general public and our parks Friday, so that way they can post signs for the public. We sample for a lot of things out there. Got it on our list here, but microsystems. This year we're going to add some cylindrous thermopsin testing to a subset of beaches, and then we're working with Adina Howe and her group to do some additional additional sampling for them as part of this EPA STAR grant that they're working on. So kind of some of our program objectives. Main objective is public health. We're wanting to get this data out so people can have it, make decisions on whether or not they want to go to the beach or play in the water. But we also use this for long-term tracking long-term trends, and then we use it with our. We don't use so much the microsystem data with our biannual report, but we use our other stuff from our bacteria data. Our current exceedance level, or action level, as we like to call it, is 20 micrograms per liter. It's based on the WHO data. There is a draft of 4 micrograms per liter that the EPA has out, but it's in draft right now. And as soon as that comes through, we'll evaluate whether we want to adopt that or not for the state. But the current one right now is a 20 microgram per liter. And when that's exceeded, we'll post a warning sign for that week. And if it comes down next week, we'll pull the sign, or flip the sign actually. So a little bit about harmful algal blooms. Jeff kind of mentioned on how they come about, but what makes them harmful? You know, if the colony, if they get a large enough bloom, that's typically when you start seeing harmful effects with them. Or I should say, kind of maybe to their advantage or disadvantage, they easily blow around the lake and can accumulate in bays and whatnot. Biologically, the function's kind of unclear of what the toxins are used for. There's lots of different theories on why they happen, but these toxins definitely do have negative effects to aquatic life, wildlife, domestic animals, us. And Susie made a good point, or showed some good slides of toxins to livers and stuff like that. Negative impacts to humans. Most of it's dermal. You can have ingestion impacts. That's usually comes from swimming, stuff like that. And inhalation from boating, water skiing, near shore, and whatnot. So that's a list of kind of some of the things that can happen if toxin levels are high enough and you come into contact with it. These are some of just kind of general other negative impacts. Effects to wildlife. Waterfowl, bats, other things like that that drink the water often be found dead if there's a harmful algal bloom. Cattle deaths, things like that, pet deaths that can occur. Usually for them, they go in the water, they clean their fur, and that can come about. Some of the effects on fish, there's definitely some habitat altering effects that can happen. Blooms occur, they'll block the sunlight. You can decrease your macrophyte beds, things like that. Let's see. Then you get low oxygen depletion due to decomp from the large algal blooms. And then, one of the topics that sometimes comes up is toxins in the fish tissue itself. Typically, that risk has been associated with the gut tract, so a lot of times we recommend people, clean their fish, don't eat the guts. Because a lot of the studies have shown that the fillet tissue, the meat, has been less affected. There's been some new research that the EPA has been working on, a new LCMS method, which is this MPV method, and they've been able to start detecting toxins in both spike tissues as well as tissue from fish that were in experimental streams with high levels of toxin in them. From what I could tell when they were giving that presentation, it's hard to tell how high they spiked the streams and how much toxin they actually detected, and it was more a presence absence type thing. So I think that'll be kind of, when they finalize that report, it may change our view on how affected recent events, I'm sure a lot of you have seen the Utah lake closure. Fairly, compared to some of our lakes, fairly large, 150 square miles, but the bloom was definitely visible from space. They had roughly about 500 reports of human exposure to that, and some of the symptoms that people were having in and around the lake. When they finally got some of the data back, though, the main body of the lake itself wasn't actually at an advisory level, but definitely in the bays, they were well above, what we would consider, an advisory level event, being at 177 micrograms per liter in the bay. So, prevailing winds can concentrate these things and go from there. The other event that obviously a lot of people know about is in 2014. There was a no drink order in Toledo. Again, much larger lake than we have. Pretty decent sized bloom. But that's just kind of, it's coming into the media more and more when these blooms happen. It seems like it's bigger and bigger. But that gets us to our data for our state, kind of what we have learned. What you see in this data is kind of the average events that happen at our various beaches across the state for our state lakes. The bigger the dot, the green one there, that's the more events. It's an average of slightly greater than 3. I should have put a cap on that so that people knew. But it was roughly 3. This is just showing how many average events per year we have. So you got, Green Valley, Black Hawk Lake up there. But most of the time, they're sitting there about, one event a year that we could have. When we go to what happened last year in 2017, this thing did it right. We only actually had 5 events in the state last year. But one thing to notice is Green Valley was still a hot spot. And Black Hawk Lake was another one that we also was another kind of hot spot in the state that actually happened. But we only did have 5 events last year. This is just kind of showing you the percent of events we've had over the years. I know it's kind of like the 96. The blue is good actually, but the red below is the percentage of events out of all of the total events that occurred in the year. And I'm going to just blow this up a little bit to make it a little easier to look at. So, starting in 2006, 2007, we were kind of running about 2% of events out of all of our sampling events. In 2008, we actually had 0. And then we had this general trend upwards into 2016, where we got just about 6% of our sampling events that had a event that was at 20 micrograms per liter or greater. And then we dropped off last year, it's down to 5. And last year was a pretty dry spring, so at least thinking around my desk is we had during application times maybe we just didn't have stuff running off and driving the system hard. Although it was early ice out, and I thought we were going to have blooms like that last year. This kind of shows weekly how it progressed. We had 2 events during week 7. That's that 4th of July week, and then it picked up towards the end of the season. If you look at all of the data, we see a general trend from the beginning of our sampling season, the end of our season, a general trend up. So as it gets warmer throughout the season, we tend to see more events happening at our lakes. Interestingly enough, the spike on week 7 is our 4th of July week, and that's something that we're starting to. I just kind of noticed that the other day as something we might want to look into. Why all of a sudden, 4th of July week, do we have a spike? Is it all the excessive voting turning up the bottom and stuff like that? But there's just a general trend from the beginning of the season to the end of the season of having more events as you progress through. And I think a lot of you kind of recognize that probably general pattern. This is from our Department of Public Health and the number of events that suspected reported events for kind of a low year for finding toxin in our lakes, and subsequently we had I think there was only one report that year, maybe it was two, I don't remember. Talk to Steve on that one, or Stu on that one. That's kind of the trend of that throughout the time. And I was told to keep it short and sweet, and that's all I got.
Perfect. We got time for a couple of questions before we need to head to the big auditorium. So if you have questions for any of us, go ahead. Yes?
On the cases of people being exposed to microsystems, do you think that the medical community needs to be made more aware and can readily identify people coming in with symptoms, and that maybe some of those are just for one site thinking there's something else?
That is kind of that it is a big problem. People in the state here travel long distances to recreate. So if you all of a sudden get symptoms the next day, your medical provider might not recognize the fact that you were on a lake that may or may not have had a balloon. So it is an area that's hard to track. And it's same with the veterinary community. It's another, if there's dog deaths, they may attribute it to something else because they don't ask the person, well, did you have your dog swimming up at X Lake 40 miles away from them? A lot of the cute things are kind of hard to track. And microcystin, some of that liver toxin stuff is chronic, so it can take a number of years to actually show up.
One more question? Yes?
So I was just curious if you can detect blue-green algae with the human eye. I know that there's a lot of lab tests. I think one of the presentations was talking about blue-green versus golden versus red, and the presence of cyanobacteria. I'm just curious if lay people could detect one blue-green as opposed to a different type of algae.
You could probably get pretty close to figuring out if it was blue-green or not visually, but knowing if it was toxic or not, or a toxic variant would be impossible on that front. But there's a stick and bottle test that people often use.
Here's a big take home. We don't have golden algae in Iowa, which was in the talk, and we don't have red tides because they're in marine environments. So toxic ones that we have here are blue-green blooms. Like I showed, 80% of our algae in our lakes is blue-green, but the really harmful stuff comes with those blooms, and you could see the windrow excessive blooms up on the shore, and if you see that, that's a problem to stay away from. Often, sometimes it looks like you described it as turquoise paint has been poured out on the lake. If you see that, you want to stay away. So, great question. Thank you. And thank you very much for attending this set of talks. And now